speaker today is Kiri Jorgensen. She is a writer, teacher, entrepreneur, wife, mother, and also the senior editor and publisher at Chicken Scratch Books. And she has been involved in children's literature for over 30 years. She's written plays, taught writing to kids, teens, adults in multiple settings and genres. She's also served as a regional advisor for the Society for Children Book Writers and Illustrators in Montana. And she loves teaching people about middle grade readers. And I think the things that she's going to bring to the table today are going to apply to all genres because, you know, as writers, we want to so that they are the best that they can be. So I'm going to turn it over to Kiri.
Thank you, Lynette. Can everybody hear me? Good. I'm glad. I'm excited to be here with you guys today. This looks like a great group. It's fun to, one of the most valuable experiences you'll have is being a good, strong writers group that can support you and help you and guide you as you learn and grow in your writing journey. So I'm excited to be here. Like Lynette said, I live in Montana. I actually am in a tiny little town called Wisdom in the middle of nowhere, Montana. And I love the fact that I can run a business from the middle of nowhere. Technology is awesome and can help us in so many ways that way. So I am going to go ahead and start today. The presentation that I'm giving is, I call it Plotting and Scheming, Crafting the Middle Grade Novel to Connect. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen because I do have slides that go along with this. Let's see, this will take me just a second to pull it up. And I don't know why it won't let me do the slideshow. Here we go. Okay. Like Lynette said, I am the publisher and senior editor at Chicken Scratch Books. This is a business that I started just a few years ago. We're brand new, just getting off the ground. We only publish new traditional middle grade fiction. Middle grade are novels. That's the age category for kids that are between the ages of 9 and about 14. And so think, fourth grade through 8th grade, just those upper elementary and then middle school ages. These are the books that kids read when they're first branching into novels, full-length novels. They're past the early readers, they're past the early chapter books. Now they're getting into full-blown novels. Middle grade is divided into two categories, actually, upper middle grade and lower middle grade. And there's a big difference between a 9-year-old and a 14-year-old. And so there's also a big difference in the plot complexity as well as the deepness of the themes within these stories that are written either lower middle grade or upper middle grade. And so it's kind of a broad but also very narrow category for kids' books. And it's my passion. I love middle grade novels. So think Harry Potter. The first few books are upper middle grade novels. Those are probably the most famous of all middle grade novels out there. The later books in the series were definitely more YA, but those first ones were solidly middle grade. All right, let's go ahead and talk about how to connect to these middle grade readers. I guess I'll talk a little bit more about Chicken Scratch because that's on my slide here. One of our goals here is that we help authors achieve their vision of their story. We really focus on bringing out the heart of the story itself. In addition to publishing books, we also, that's only half of our business, we have an educational side as well. For every book that we publish, we create 2 online novel study courses that kids can take. Most of our focus in our marketing is on the homeschool market because our courses are ideal for that setting. But we also market to charter schools and rural schools, areas where independent work is prized within the education system. And these are courses that are based off of each of our novels. All right, connecting to your readers. That's the goal of every author, every age category, every genre. You want your readers to connect to the story, to the main character, to what's going on, so that they'll keep the book in their hands. Middle grade readers, this is especially tough for. I spent a lot of years as a teacher of middle grade age in the public schools, and Those kids are so picky when it comes to their reading. If they pick up a book and if they don't connect in the first couple of chapters, they just put the book down. As adults, we tend to read just to see what's going to happen. We'll plow through even if we're not that engaged, but kids don't do that. They put it away. They won't read it. And so as writers, you have to figure out how to connect right off the bat as quickly as you can with your reader so that they will keep the book in their hands. So how do you find that connection? You've got to give the reader a reason to cheer for your protagonist. So one way that I like to teach, and I do this in my webinars as well as my live presentations, is that I like to give a lot of examples from actual works of fiction. And so I'm going to be doing that today. I'm going to be analyzing a published middle grade novel. It's an excellent book. And it's a book that I have used in my classrooms. It's not one that Chicken Scratch published, but I've used it in my classrooms in the past, and my students loved this main character and just cheered him on. And it's a little bit interesting once you hear about the book why they love this character so much, but they do. What we're going to be analyzing, looking at this novel, we're going to be analyzing the plot structure and then the motive elements and how they interplay with each other. And hopefully by going through this analysis today, you'll be able to then apply these concepts to your own manuscript, to your own writing, and see if you can identify better ways to build those connections within your writing. All right, the book I'm going to be using is called Scar Island by Dan Gemeinhardt. This is an excellent middle grade book. Dan Gemeinhardt, if you have not read any of Dan's books, I highly, highly recommend it. He writes middle grade novels, is all he writes, but they are fantastic. One of the things that I love about middle grade fiction is that it's pure storytelling. It's the basic pure elements of story given in a way that's very engaging very quickly. And so excellent, excellent author, Dan Gemeinhardt. This particular story has lots of plot twists and turns and very distinct turning point scenes. There's a very strong protagonist with clear motives, but his motives change that we're going to be talking about. And then he's on this path to discovering the root of all his needs. And so perfect book to be using for this analysis. All right. Let's talk for just a minute about these pieces. The plot. The plot is the external or physical arc of the story. There are so many different ways to craft a plot. I think there are like more than 36 identified plotting methods, ways to lay out a plot. And you've heard of the 3-act play or Save the Cat, or anyway, there's so many different ways to plot a story. There's a website I have listed here, vanillagrass.com. They have an excellent post on their website that talks about all the different identified methods of plotting a story. And it's quite fascinating actually to look at the different ways that are out there and recognized in the academic world as legitimate plotting structures. Anyway, that's a fun website to visit. My philosophy as an editor and as a publisher and as a writer is that it really doesn't matter which plot you follow, which plot structure you embrace, whatever works for you, do it. As long as that structure includes 3 turning point scenes. These turning point scenes have to be the grounding basis for your plot structure. And we're going to talk about those scenes. So the motive or the internal emotional arc of the story can also follow a myriad of paths. I mean, there's a whole workshops and weekends and conventions dedicated to motive, trying to help authors and writers understand what motive is and how to bring that motive clearly into your story. So again, a motive is one of those things that has to be deliberately connected to the plot. And essentially that means the story will be character driven. The character is making decisions that's driving the plot. If you connect that motive to the plot, then you're going to have a motive that's believable for your reader and connectable. So connecting the motive directly to the plot using agency, that's the choices of your main character, at these 3 turning point scenes will make your readers cheer your protagonist on as they move through the story. All right, let's talk more detail about these things. We're going to start by talking about these turning point scenes in your plot. So just thinking the external structure of your story here. The first turning point scene I like to call the earth-shaking event. The earth-shaking event happens, it happens within the first quarter of your book. So literally within the first quarter of the pages, I have it marked here. Here's our first turning point scene. Quarter of the way through the book. It happens just a little before that actual page count of a quarter way through the book. You can't have it later than that or your reader's going to lose interest. You can't have it it can't be in the first chapter. And that's something that I'm a stickler on as an editor. Sometimes authors and writers like to put that earth-shaking event right off the bat. And the problem with putting it in the very first chapter is that your reader hasn't had the opportunity to become emotionally connected to I keep using that word connected, to be emotionally receptive to your protagonist yet. The reader needs to see your protagonist in their normal world. Now, granted, something may have just happened that has changed their normal world, but it's not the earth-shaking event. It's just the world that your character is living in. The reader needs to see that normal world. They need to see their normal emotions, their normal experiences, their normal lifestyle, even just for a little bit. Give us that first chapter to introduce what's happening in their real normal world, and then throw the earth-shaking event in there. So no later than a quarter of the way, but not in the first chapter. It has to be somewhere in that first quarter. After the reader is well grounded in that normal, then the earth-shaking event hits. The second turning point scene happens right in the middle of your book. Now this is an important scene because it's going to keep the middle from sagging. And here I have this book marked right in the middle. That's where that midpoint decision is placed. So at the time of the earth-shaking event, your protagonist makes a decision that sends them on a new path. They have failed to solve their problem on that path. They hit the midpoint of the book. They recognize that, yeah, things have not been working. I need to try something different. And they shift direction again. That's what this midpoint decision is. It has to be a deliberate decision that's made right halfway through the story. And then the third turning point scene that's vital to have in your story is what I call the epiphany. It usually comes right before the climax, and then it drives the action forward to the end of the book. Sometimes it's mixed right in with the climax scene. It's all connected. Essentially, the epiphany is where the protagonist recognizes all the failures that they've made up to that point in all these different directions they've tried. And now here they are in a scene. Usually it's very deeply introspective, and they are realizing what it's actually going to take. They've hit rock bottom. They're realizing what's actually going to take to solve their problem. And they're willing to go forward because they know that's what they have to do. And so that's that epiphany scene. So these are the three turning point scenes, the three scenes of the plot that are vital for the story to be moving along in a progressive way that your reader's going to connect to. I always look for these three turning point scenes. Okay, let's talk about Scar Island. In Scar Island, I need to give you a little bit of background for the story, and then we're going to talk about each of these three turning point scenes as they come in the book. So the story of Scar Island is about a boy named Jonathan. He's 13, and the very first chapter opens with him on a little motorboat heading out to an island prison. He has been sentenced to go to a place called Slabhenge for a crime that he's committed. We don't know what that crime is. And it's basically a reformatory prison on this little island way out in the bay. And he is on his way there, and he's accepted his fate. That's where he's headed. So he gets to Slabhenge. He's there for a day. We're introduced to the other boys that are there on the island. We're introduced to the adults that are there. It's run very prison-like. It's not a comfortable place by any stretch of the imagination. It's an old lighthouse that had been turned into an insane asylum for a while, and now it's a reformatory school for boys. It's been around for 100 years or so, this Slabhenge structure out on this little tiny island. And so Jonathan is there. His very first morning, he wakes up. He just had a miserable night in his cell. He wakes up, and the boys are all taken outside for the daily muster. They have to stand on these little bricks, so they're up above the ground on these narrow little bricks, and they have to stand there. If they fall off, they're punished. They have to be standing perfectly still on these little bricks that they're on. There happens to be a storm. It's raining. It's raining pretty heavily on the boys while they're out there. All the adults are standing there in front of them, giving them their daily instructions and basically belittling them and beating them down. And while they're there out in the outside courtyard area at Slabhenge in this storm, the warden has this sword that he likes to carry around, and he's waving it around as he's yelling and talking, and it gets struck by lightning. The sword gets struck by lightning. All of the adults are standing in a pool of water from the rain. They are all instantly killed. And so that's the earth-shaking event. Definitely earth-shaking in this situation. All the adults are killed. The boys who had been standing up on their bricks were not affected by this. So definitely a very shocking scene, literally, and earth-shaking for Jonathan and the other boys that are there at Slabhenge. That's the earth-shaking event, and it happens about 4 chapters in to the book. So definitely within that first quarter section. And it's going to change everything, that event. Okay, the midpoint decision. So let me keep telling the story a little bit here. After the adults had all been killed, the boys are there on the island at Slabhenge alone, and a new boy has taken over the sword. His name is Sebastian, and he has become the leader. You'll probably recognize this as reminiscent of, it's kind of a retelling of Lord of the Flies in a more modern way. Anyway, a new boy has taken over as the leader, and he has just discovered that a younger boy was stealing his chocolates and eating some of them, and he's very angry. And at this midpoint decision, this younger boy is being punished. His punishment has been handed down. And a lot of the other boys are like, wait a minute, that's not the way things are supposed to work here. You know, you're not really in charge. There's no adults here, but this Sebastian boy who has taken charge, he's being strong and he's being powerful, and he's got the sword, and he says, I am in charge. And he hands down punishment to this younger boy that had stolen chocolate. And our main character in this scene makes a decision that I'm going to talk about in a minute that changes his path again. So that's where this midpoint decision scene comes. And we'll talk about that decision itself when we discuss motive. Okay, then the epiphany scene, the third turning point scene later in this story. So everything that Jonathan, our main character, has done up to this point has failed. He's trying to come to some sort of resolution internally, as well as deal with the external issues that he's facing there at Slabhenge, and nothing he has tried has worked. So in the epiphany scene, I need to get a drink just a sec. Another huge storm has come onto the island, but this one is actually a hurricane. And the boys didn't know it was coming, and it hits the island with huge force. Over the course of time, of this storm getting worse and worse, the windows have broken on Slabhenge from the wind, and water is filling up, and they're realizing that the island itself that this structure is sitting on is sinking. This hurricane is battering their island really bad, and they're filling up with water. That's kind of the setting, the external part of where this epiphany scene happens. And it's in this scene that what's happening in the physical situation that once again, Jonathan, our main character, shifts and into a whole new direction. At this epiphany scene, he finally realizes what it is that he really needs deep down inside. So we'll talk about that in just a minute too when we discuss motive. So those are the 3 scenes. Now let's talk about motive and the layers of motive. Your main character's motive is why they do what they do, why they make the choices that they do. Motive can be divided into 3 levels or layers. This is how I like to look at motive. And again, there are books and courses and lots of information about motive. My recommendation is study all of them and then figure out what works for you. I like this 3 layers of motive when I talk about the character's motives. The top layer I call the desire. This is the external or physical need that they have. It often changes several times through the course of the story as they shift and try new things. but their desire is a very strong driving force, because that's what they need to do on that surface level. It can be something like save the princess, or their desire is to make sure that they get their homework done on time. I don't know, whatever desire, that surface thing that they need to do. The think need is the next layer down. This is the emotional need that they think they have. They think they need this and that it will make them feel better. It'll solve their problems. They think it will, if this would only happen, then everything would be better. This think need sometimes also changes as the story goes on and as they learn more. But the think need itself is the main driving force for most of the book. Typically that think need, so the desire is sometimes from the very beginning of the book. The think need comes into play typically at the latest, at the earth-shaking event. They think they need to take this path in order to solve their problems. The think need drives all the way through the epiphany scene. At the epiphany scene is where they discover what the root of all their needs are. So the root of all needs, it's the emotional need at the root of everything else that they're doing. Often the protagonist doesn't even know it's there through most of the book. And sometimes even in that epiphany scene, they might understand more of what that root of all needs is, but they may not fully be able to express what it is exactly. Often the reader can, though, even if the main character doesn't fully understand it themselves. But if they understand it enough, that it drives them forward to the climax and the resolution of the story itself. And they do solve their problems that they need to. So the root of all needs is it never changes. It's been there the whole time, but the protagonist was just unaware of it. Usually the reader is unaware of it too, until that epiphany scene when it kind of all comes to light, and then everything makes sense to both the protagonist as well as the reader. Okay, let's look at, first a few more notes about motive. Having a clear motive means it makes sense to the reader. It does not mean that it's clear to the main character themselves. They often are just kind of confused about a lot of what they're doing with their life and in their story. And so their motive, if you ask them what's their motive is, I don't know, I'm just doing it. But the reader can tell from the hints that are scattered through the story what that motive is. It needs to be clear to the reader, not necessarily to the protagonist. Usually characters in our stories will act based on what they think they need, which will gradually unearth what they actually need. That's kind of the process of shifting from that think need to the root of all needs. If you think you know what your character needs, think again, dig deeper, dig deeper. I'll give you some clues on how to do that. All right, let's look at Scar Island. So in Scar Island, Jonathan, his desire is to serve his time. It's very clear right from the beginning of the book that he believes that he deserves this punishment that he's received, to be sent to Slabhenge. And he wants to, because he thinks that by accepting the punishment that's been meted to him, that it will heal him inside. He has some really deep struggles, some guilt that he's carrying, there's shame that he's carrying. And he thinks that if he endures this punishment, that it will ease that pain that he's feeling inside. And so that's kind of his surface level. He's gonna go to Slabhenge, he's gonna serve his time. And he's going to take whatever punishment and whatever pain that involves, because he thinks that's what will solve his issues. That's his think need. And then his think need, it kind of shifts just a little. And we'll link it directly to that midpoint decision here in a minute, but let me explain what it was. Jonathan has a natural tendency, he's a leader, and he has a natural tendency to stick up for the little guy. And we see that consistently through the story. But by doing that, his problems weren't solved. And so he decides that he's going to shift away from that as well. And he thinks that maybe that then will help him come to the root of all of his needs or solve all of his problems. Ultimately, that doesn't work either. And so what he realizes in the epiphany scene is the root of all of his needs, which is that he needs redemption, is what he needs. And that is what's at the root of driving everything he's doing. Okay, so how do you connect the plot points, those three turning point scenes, how do you connect that directly to motive? And the answer is agency. It's got to be built into the choices that your character is making in those scenes. So we have these big, interesting scenes happening, and then your character is behaving through their choices. They're deliberately making choices that shift them and make those scenes even more poignant. Agency is the key. So let's look at these 3 turning point scenes and connect them to Jonathan's motives that are driving him, and show that agency in these scenes as well. So in this earth-shaking event, that very first turning point scene, when the lightning strikes and all the adults are dead out on the courtyard of the island. So Jonathan, at this point of the story, wants to serve his time. He wants to be there on Slabhenge because he believes he deserves the punishment, and that by accepting that punishment, he will be healed inside. I'm going to read to you this agency moment. This is right after this earth-shaking event, when all the adults are dead, and the kids are having to decide, what are they going to do? Okay. Jonathan took one deep breath and then spoke his voice into the silence. Maybe we shouldn't go. What? Walter asked. Head snapped his way. Sebastian's sour face turned sharply towards him. Maybe we shouldn't go, Jonathan repeated. Maybe we shouldn't tell what happened. Yet. Sebastian's eyes stayed locked on his jaw clenched. Jonathan cocked a questioning eyebrow at him, and then Sebastian nodded. What are you talking about? A kid asked. Jonathan raised his voice and put some strength into it. I'm talking about staying, without the grown-ups, without any grown-ups. I'm talking about all of us staying here at Slabhenge, alone. So this was a bold decision that Jonathan makes. He proposed, he's the new kid, he's only been there one night. He's the new kid there, and he's proposing, let's stay. We don't need to go back to our families. We don't need to go back to the mainland. Let's just stay here just for a little while and have free run of the place. We can do whatever we want. There's no adults. We can do whatever we want here. So this is a very bold decision that Jonathan makes, and it's right in line with his motive. He believes that he needs to suffer his punishment. He believes he needs to stay there in order to be healed. And so he's willing to sacrifice going back to the mainland and being reunited with his family. He's willing to not do that because he truly believes and thinks that he needs to suffer his punishment while he's there. And so his brain quickly came up with this new idea of, let's just stay. So this was a very bold decision that Jonathan threw out there, and the boys decide to do it. They decide to stay on the island. So this was an example of a specific deliberate decision made by the protagonist that completely shifted the course of events in the story at that moment of the earth-shaking event. So you can see how the event of the plot then caused the decision to be made that shifted, based on the motive, the way the plot is going. Very character-driven. When you bring that, tie that agency in, then we have a very character-driven story. Okay, now let's jump to this connecting at the midpoint decision. So the boys are on the island. They're there without any adults. Sebastian kind of takes over as he's kind of the bully from the beginning, and he takes over as the new leader. He wields the sword. A younger boy has stolen some of his chocolate and eaten it, and he's very angry about it, and he's dishing out the punishment for this younger boy. And typically, Jonathan, who is also a leader, has always stood up for the younger boys. But now, in this midpoint decision, Jonathan realizes that everything he's done so far, he's still really struggling. He's still really having a lot of issues internally. And so he makes the decision not to help the younger boy. Now, again, this is driven by his think need that he needs to be punished. He's come to the conclusion that by being a leader, by standing up for these younger kids, that is preventing him from suffering the pain of his punishment. And he needs that in order to heal. So I'm going to read the moment of this choice, this agency, here at the midpoint decision. let's see. Colin, who is Jonathan's friend here, he says, Colin looked desperately at Jonathan. Do something, he pleaded. Sebastian looked expectantly at Jonathan, but Jonathan was looking at Benny. Benny's mouth was set in a small, grim smile, and he shook his head at Jonathan just one time. Jonathan, Colin begged. Jonathan eyed Benny for one more moment and then dropped his eyes to the floor and shook his head. So he's being threatened. He realizes that he's got to do something different, and he makes that deliberate choice to not stand up for the younger boy, to not do something in a situation that he normally would have. So he's shifting, and it's very recognizable to the reader. They say, wait a minute, that's not like Jonathan at all. He's shifting his direction based on his need to be punished. He thinks he needs to be punished because that's the only way he believes he can heal. So by this part of the story, failures upon failures are compounding. And because of those compounded failures to solve the problem, the main character shifts again or buckles down on something in a new way. And so this deliberate decision here at this midpoint scene puts the character on another new path. So Jonathan has now shifted himself onto a path where he's not going to be a leader. He's not going to stand up. He's going to be submissive. And we'll see how that works for him, right? But failure upon failure leads to another big shift that will then essentially lead to the epiphany scene. So at this point, Jonathan's still very driven by his think need. That's what he is, that's where he is poised. Then we get to this final epiphany scene. A little bit of lead up to here. So as this storm was just starting to settle in on the island, Colin, who is Jonathan's friend, got busted for doing something that Sebastian didn't like, and he got sentenced. And what they did to him for his punishment was to take him down into the basement. There's a bunch of tunnels and old pathways and hallways and staircases and rooms way down in the basement of this structure, slab hinge. And Colin is tied up in a chair way down in the corner of the basement. And he has to stay the night down there. That's his punishment with the rats. And so Jonathan felt horrible about this, but he didn't ever, remember, he's not being a leader. He thinks he has to just suffer. And so he didn't stand up for Colin. He didn't stand up for anybody else. But now at this moment, this huge storm has come in. The reality has set in. Water is rising. And Jonathan realizes that Colin is tied up on a chair way down in the basement as this water is rising in the structure. So I'm going to read to you this moment of epiphany for Jonathan. Everyone settle down. Sebastian's harsh command silenced the rising voices. Just shut up, everyone. Let me think. We're all fine. His words shook Jonathan with the realization. All? What about Colin? He's lower down than we are. We have to go save him. Sebastian shook his head. No way. We're not going past that hatch if it's open. We have to. He'll drown. So will we if we go after him. We're staying right here until the storm stops. We can sit on the tables. No, Sebastian, we have to. No, Jonathan, we can't save him. Sebastian's voice was as hard as the sword glinting in his hand. We're not going to die trying. Jonathan swallowed. His whole body was trembling, with cold, with anger, with fear. He rubbed his arms with shivering hands, feeling the burns and scars through his wet sleeves. He imagined he could hear Colin crying for help. In his mind, he saw soggy, water-ruined paper birds, rain-soaked flowers. I'm going, he said, and his voice was soft, but at least as hard as Sebastian's. So Jonathan makes this decision at this epiphany scene to once again be a leader, to stand up for his friend, but more importantly than that, he is making the deliberate choice to risk his own life to go down into the basement and try to save Colin. So in that moment, it's like everything he's been trying and working through coalesced, and he knew now what he had to do. He knew that was what he needed, not just to save Colin, but for himself, for his internal need as well. That root of all his needs was redemption. And he knew that the way to that was to try to save Colin. And so I'm not going to tell you any more of the story because I want you to read this. Excellent book. But Jonathan made deliberate choices at each of these turning point scenes that kept moving the plot along. And then in his epiphany scene, he learns for himself what he really needs and what he's really capable of. And that moves through the climax of the story, which continues on for a while more. Excellent, excellent story. So Scar Island is a fabulous example of using these turning point scenes attached directly to the motive, linking the plot to the motive through the choices of the protagonist. So what about your story? How do we analyze your story? Okay, the first thing that I would recommend for you to do is to draw a turning point map or graph of your plot. And then see if you can clearly identify the 3 turning point scenes, the earth-shaking event, the midpoint decision, and the epiphany scene. Here's a little map that I drew for Scar Island. Now, I used to have my students do this. I've had young students as well as adult students do this type of plot map for their story. You don't have to be any sort of visual artist. I am definitely not a visual artist. This is honestly beautiful for my typical drawing skills. But here, this is basically a map of the whole story. Story starts there on the left with Jonathan coming over on a little boat to Slabhenge. It's like this big fortress. The first shift happens where all the adults are killed by lightning. The mid shift happens when Jonathan chooses not to be a leader and to help a younger boy. And then that epiphany scene happens when Jonathan chooses to risk his life to save Colin. And then from there, the plot, I use those stairs to represent the ups and downs of the plot, as well as it symbolizes the ups and downs of the basement stairs of the facility, which are actually an important part of the whole story. And then the stairs leading up into the lighthouse, which is kind of that climax scene at the very end. So this was my plot map that I drew. When you draw a map for your story, I like to just, one story that I have was a historical, this is one that I wrote myself. It was historical fiction. It was based in the 1880s. And I used a wagon wheel, from an old Conestoga wagon as my map, because I wanted to show my character in that particular story. My character, at each of the scenes of the story, he eventually worked his way full circle back to where he started, essentially, was his arc of change in some ways. And so I used that wheel as a plot map image. Another story that I did a plot map for was a garden path that had, the story had gardens in it and lots of outdoor nature things, a garden path that my character was walking with those turning point scenes portrayed along it. There's something about, as writers, there's something about being visually creative to the extent of our abilities to try to bring that creativity and the feel of the story into your plot map that I really like. And so I recommend that you try drawing just a little one-page plot map that specifically looks for those 3 turning point scenes within your story. And the image could be anything that fits the style, the mood, the feel of your story. And then after you've got that plot map drawn, for each of those 3 turning point scenes, ask your character a series of why questions. Why do they behave the way they did in that turning point scene? Why did Jonathan decide he wanted to stay on Slabhenge? I mean, it was a chance for them to leave. They hated it there. Why did he choose to stay there? And then when I have that answer in my mind, ask again, yes, but why does he feel that way? Okay, but why does he feel that way? And keep asking yourself these why questions until you can understand and clearly see in your own mind the layers of motive that your main character is experiencing. So if you can identify their desire, that one's usually easy to identify. Think need, what do they think they need to solve their problem? And they're always wrong on the think need. It never gets them what they truly need, which is that root of all needs. But that think need often does, it will guide them to the discovery of their root of all needs. So keep asking those why questions. That's how you can kind of really dig deep into the layers of motive. When I've done live workshops, I've had a writer read a scene to me, and then I just say, okay, why did your character do that? And the writer says, well, because of this and this. I said, okay, so, but why did that happen? Why did they feel the need for that? And then they think about it, okay, because of this and this. And then I just keep going, but I keep asking, keep asking. You can tell when you get to that root of all needs. And then I remember one particular workshop where I think we went through about 5 different why questions. And finally the writer was like, oh, okay, now I know what's the root of what's driving that character. So it's a kind of a fun process to really push yourself to think deeper into why your character is behaving and choosing the way that they are. So the connecting of plot and motive happens through agency. The earth-shaking event is that event about 1/4 of the way into the book. Your protagonist is being motivated by their desire and their think need. They think that the path they're going to take is the direction they need to go to meet their needs. And they use a bold decision to make it clear what they're after. That needs to be very clear to the reader that that's a deliberate decision that the character's making. One of my biggest beefs in manuscripts that I read is that things are happening to the character that are out of their control, but then they just keep happening to the character instead of the character grabbing the reins and taking control themselves. That bold decision, they are grabbing control of where the story is going to go. It's okay to have things happen to them. I mean, obviously, Jonathan getting sent out to the island and the big lightning storm killing all the adults, he had no control over any of that. But then he grabbed the situation and guided it to try to achieve his own personal think need. Okay, the midpoint decision of this scene, your protagonist is understanding that their think need hasn't been met yet. What they've done so far isn't working on that current path. So something has to shift. They make another deliberate, conscious decision. And I often like to have some sort of reflection. It doesn't have to be a huge reflection, but they need to recognize that so far what they've tried is failing. They've got to try something new. And so they shift again, still driven by that think need, possibly in a little bit of a different way, but still driven by that original think need. And this new path, again, isn't going to solve their problems, but it's going to guide them towards the resolution. So now they've shifted again, for better or for worse. It's so important that you show failures as they're working and trying to solve their problems. They're failing right and left. And so they dig deeper and they fail again, and they dig deeper and they fail again. And then that epiphany scene, your protagonist is finally recognizing that their think need isn't working because it's not real. It's not really what they need. They understand that now, and they're able to see through everything they've learned and experienced. Now they know what they have to do. If you were to ask them in that moment, so what's the root of all your needs? They may still not be able to articulate it, but they know what they need to do. And so they have that deeper understanding of the situation. And the readers are smart, even kids, they're very smart. They can pick up on so many inferences and nuances as they read. They get it. They get what's happening internally with the main characters. So now, this moment of that, after that epiphany, moment of realization guides them through the climax. Okay, make sure that those 3 turning point scenes, now obviously you have lots of other scenes mixed in there too, but those 3 turning point scenes have to be so impactful that the reader recognizes instantly that that motive and plot are connected. And it's authentic the way they connect. What makes the motive authentic is when your protagonist uses their agency through their decisions to connect that plot, to make the plot happen. They're the ones driving it. So the interconnection of plot and motive through your protagonist's choices is the exact connection your readers will feel. That's how you connect with your readers. If they can connect to how their motive is connected to the plot, they will personally be connected. It's all the same connection. And then they're going to cheer your protagonist on as they go through the story. So that is what I always look for as an editor. I'm always looking for turning point scenes that are deliberate, that are poignant, that clearly show agency driven by authentic motive. That's what I love to see in a story. And like I said, my specialty is middle grade, and these are especially vital in middle grade because it's such pure storytelling. The books are shorter. It has to be purely driven through those story elements. But this is also extremely applicable to any age category that you're writing. Your readers need to connect, and they will connect through the authentic connection of motive and plot within your character's agency. So that's my presentation. Any questions? I'm going to go ahead and unshare my computer here, my screen. Any questions? I'm happy. You're welcome to type it into the chat or to just unmute yourself and ask.
Yes, I have a question.
Yes.
How long are your books generally?
How long are they? They vary pretty widely. The sweet spot for middle grade is about 45,000 words. I have had some that are as low as 40 and some that are as high as 60. So about 45,000 is typically what we look for middle grade. But hey, it depends on the story. Fantasy, historical fiction, they have so much more world building. They can definitely stretch longer. And I have had some that have been, well, I usually try to get them cut down to not more than 60, but we're pushing the line sometimes on that. Mm-hmm. So it really depends on the story, but that's kind of the general answer to that one.
Okay, and is the language, usage of language supposed to be suited to that age?
With middle grade, not so much. By the time they're 12, 13, 14, especially that upper middle grade, their language skills are quite advanced. And so typically with chapter books, you do have to consider the vocabulary and the language that you used within the story. But by the time you hit middle grade, they are happy to jump into new words they've not seen before, and they understand them in context a lot better as they're reading. It's not an issue. And so that's not something I worry about. As far as language, meaning maybe vulgar language, middle grade, we avoid all of that. But the words that we use with the stories are I've seen middle grade books with so many words that I don't even know what they mean. And that's been really fun for me because the kids get it. They can sense the context and understand what the words are. So
oh, that's great. And what size type is usually used?
When I format the books for the publication, anywhere from about 8.5 to 10 point, depending on the font that we're using.
Well, what font do you like?
Oh, for the publication, anything that's easy to read. I have several there's one called Gandhi Serif that I really like, that I use in quite a few of my books. And there's one called Permian Slam, what's it called? Permian, I can't remember what it's called. Anyway, Permian something, typeface that I also like. Those are the two I think that I use most often in my actual production of the files for the book printing.
Okay, and when
easy to read.
When someone submits something to you, they just do it in whatever typeface they choose, and then you change it.
Yes, and then I change it just so it's easy to read. I'm happy with Calibri, with Arial, with Times New Roman, anything that's easy to read. I'm good with for submissions.
Okay, and do they usually include pictures or not?
Middle grade, no. Nope, we don't do middle. Sometimes lower middle grade books have some illustrations in them, but typically middle grade doesn't have illustrations. Chapter books is where you'll find a lot of illustrations in a chapter book with a lot of illustrations built in. So middle grade is a little bit beyond that. For the most part, our only illustrations are at the chapter head illustrations. So.
Okay, and do you include a table of contents or index?
I have never done index, table of contents occasionally,
Mhm.
depends on the book. Some books lend themselves well to that.
Mhm.
We do some of our books that are historical fiction. We include sources at the back. We always include author's notes. Well, if the authors want to put that in there. It really just depends on the book.
Mhm. Okay. Anybody else have a question or a comment?
I'm going to go ahead.
Fine.
Yeah, Greg?
I was wondering about your view of the Captain Underpants series.
Yes.
Could you make a comment one way or the other
Yes,
about
I
this?
will make a comment on Captain Underpants. I am a believer in any book that'll get reluctant readers to read is a good book, but I don't view Captain Underpants as literature. It's a kids love Captain Underpants. I don't love Captain Underpants, but the kids, it's kind of a stepping stone series for a lot of kids. It's kind of that first, and there are more and more books like that coming out because of the popularity of Captain Underpants. It's kind of almost a transition between chapter books with lots of illustrations into this just highly illustrated novel, and then they'll shift into novels that actually have some meat and structure. I'm a big believer in middle grade novels having meat, having purpose. I don't like fluff. Captain Underpants is fluff, and again, I'm not going to diminish their value. They definitely serve a purpose. That type of book, it's not something we publish, and it's not something that I encourage kids to stick with for very long. They can use it as a stepping stone in their reading journey. That's my opinion on the Captain Underpants type of book.
Thanks.
I see a question over here. Graphic novels are similar. I kind of have graphic novels are really popular right now as well. And I've used them in my classrooms. I kind of view them in the same way that I view the Captain Underpants, only different. Graphic novels, in my mind, are not literature. They do have a storyline. Sometimes they have some deep themes, but so little of the story is told in words that I don't view it as literature itself. Most of the story is told through the graphic illustrations, and there are some absolutely beautiful graphic novels out there. We again don't publish graphic novels, at least not at this stage, but they're very popular and rising in popularity right now. In some ways, I view them as a bit of a cop-out for readers. The language is more advanced than like Captain Underpants, and the storylines are more deep, but sometimes kids will lock in because they can read a whole novel in an hour. And so in their mind, it's an easy read, it's an easy story, and they really don't get deeply into it anyway. So it has a place as well. Graphic novels definitely can encourage kids to read when they might be reluctant otherwise, but I still do not view them as literature. So that's my opinions on highly illustrated lower middle grade novels, and then the graphic novels, with the kind of some new genres that are filtering into the world of children's literature.
Michelle?
I have a question. So I noticed on your final screen of your presentation that you had a submission code.
Yes.
Is that still a valid one for anyone who might have a middle grade novel they would like to submit to your?
Sure, yes. If you have a middle grade novel, please do submit. We are open to submissions. Read about us on our website. I don't have, let's see, my submission form, it's just a form. I don't do query letters. I just have you fill out a form where you answer a bunch of questions about yourself and your writing experience and your story. And then you submit the first 5 chapters of the book. And so that's all on my submission form on the website. Our submission form is only open the first week of each month. So the 1st through the 8th of each month is the only time that submission form is open. And so get yourself prepared. One thing that I do ask for on that submission form is a 100-word pitch of your story. And also on my website, I have coursework for writers, courses. If you look under the courses tab on my website, there are Chicken Scratch Writing School. I have Chicken Scratch Writing School and Chicken Scratch Reading School. The Reading School are the novel study courses for the students, for the kids. And the Writing School is courses for the authors. I want to help prospective authors hone their craft as much as they can before they submit to me. And so I have a course, I have some courses that are free, some that are paid on my website. One of the free courses is how to write a 100-word pitch. So if you want to submit to me, I would recommend taking that quick little course so you know what I expect for a 100-word pitch, so that then you can write a bang up pitch, and when you submit to me, you'll have that ready to go. Long explanation, yes.
So is the webinar code then still March/21?
I didn't even look at that. So no, that was from last year. Yeah.
Okay. So
But you
what
don't need to.
what is your
Just
code for this one?
just go ahead and put your Diamond Valley. Is it Diamond Valley? Is that what it was called? Your group, Diamond Valley.
Valley Writers Guild. Mhm.
Yes.
So
Just write that on.
usually abbreviate it by DV.
Perfect.
You know.
Just let me know that that's, yeah, I didn't even notice that on that last page. Yeah,
See, I thought no one was paying attention.
yeah, good thing. Anyway, yeah, just let me know where you're from. That's essentially what I want to know from that.
Did you have your email address on your last?
I'll
Slide, I
give it to you.
missed it.
It's just Kiri J at chickenscratchbooks.com. And my name is KIRI J. Kiri J at chickenscratchbooks.com is my direct email. And you're welcome to email me there too with questions or thoughts or information.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I do want to take just a minute, if everybody's okay. I want to just show you the books that we have out so far, just for fun. Sophie
Kiri-
Murphy Does Not Exist was our first book. It came out in March of 21 by Tiffany Blanchard. Contemporary humor story, super fun. Our second book was Maddie McDowell and the Rodeo Robbery by Luann Rod. This one is a historical mystery set in a 1919 rodeo show. Very fun, Pinkerton type mystery. Our third book was Dreadwatch by Jared Agard. Dreadwatch is a supernatural thriller, edge of your seat suspense, just a little bit scary, very excellent story. Our fourth book, Best Friends Playbook by A.W. Downer. This one is a contemporary friendship story about a girl in a homeschool setting who has a very vivid imagination as she tries to learn how to be a friend. Very fun. This one is our only designated lower middle grade novel. And we delineate that specifically by the complexity of the plot as well as the themes. They're a little less complex, and so we call it lower middle grade, but it's still not illustrated. And then after that one, we had The Cassandra Curse came out. This is by Hope Bollinger. This one is speculative. There's a portal to another world, and Charity, our main character, has to save the world from a curse that's leaking in from the other side. Very funny and zany story. After that, we had Raccoon Summer by Betty Vanderwoon. This one is technically historical fiction because it's set in the early 80s, which is now considered historical fiction. And so, yeah, that's always shocking to people to hear, but it's true, unfortunately. This is the story of a boy who rescues 3 baby raccoons that were orphaned, and he, with the help of a neighbor, raises them to release into the wild. And at the same time, he's dealing with some pretty deep family issues, but a very beautiful telling of that story. And then our most recent one that just came out, A Kidnapping in Kentucky, 1776 by Elizabeth Rom. This book tells the true story of Daniel Boone's daughter, Jemima, who in 1776 was kidnapped by Indians. He tracked her for 3 days and rescued her. And it tells that story from 2 perspectives. Jemima, who was kidnapped, and then every other chapter is John Gass, a boy who was a member of the rescue party. So it's fiction, but it's based on that true event. And it's a very fun, adventurous story. So those are the first 7 books that we have out so far. We're doing every other month a new book, and its courses are coming out. And we have books all set through the rest of this year and next year. And we're now into 24. So lots more coming, which is really, really exciting. Anyway, lots of variety, lots of fun books. They're great stories. Yes, Howard, you're raising your hand.
Yes, I have a question.
Yes.
On the business side, what can an author expect in terms of royalty?
That's a good question. We do things a little bit different at Chicken Scratch. We don't have a flat royalty rate. Instead, we offer our authors 50% of net proceeds of each of the sales of the book and 20% of net proceeds on the course sales. And so they get compensation for the books and the courses that are sold to go along with them. And so the way that plays out, net proceeds has a few different definitions depending on the point of sale. It's very much a model more in line with what you'd see for product sales than for book royalties. And we do that because of the courses, because we have that different business model than a typical traditional publisher has. But ultimately, what we're seeing is that it plays out to just a little bit higher than what you might expect in compensation from a traditional type flat royalty rate. So very comparable. If anything, just a little bit higher than that.
Okay, and what's the status of the copyright?
All of the copyright, the authors retain the copyright. We only take the rights for publication, as well as derivative rights, so we can build the courses, the coursework along with the books. And I will mention too, the authors are a part of the courses in the form of videos. The authors each get to create 3 videos that are included in the coursework. So the students get to actually meet the authors while they're reading the books, which is very fun.
Cool.
Oh, that sounds exciting, actually.
Yeah, it is very fun. Yeah.
Mhm.
And the funnest part is that the at the end of each of the courses that the students take, they get to do what we call final fun with the author. And I leave that one totally up to the author what they want to do. I'll just give you an example. So for Maddie McDowell and the rodeo robbery, Luann Rod herself, the author, is an avid horsewoman. And so she put on a GoPro and took the kids on a horse ride for her final fun with the author video. So very fun things that the authors get to be a part of with the books. Lynette.
Just mentioning on Luann's book, she was up for a Spur Award, wasn't she? I believe.
Yes, and she actually was one of the finalists in the juvenile fiction category. She just went this weekend and got her award this past weekend. So
yeah,
actually, I think it was like 2 days ago.
Yeah, I actually read that book. It was really good. In fact, that's how I met you, was at the book launch at the library.
Yes.
Do you find that there's a particular genre that sells well in middle grade? Because the books you showed, there was you had spec fic, you had historicals. What are you finding is popular right now?
In middle grade, anything is popular. This age of kids are open to read anything that's a good book. A lot of them will, in this middle grade age, they'll experiment with lots of different genres, and this is where they identify where their favorite genre is. So by the time they shift into YA, they've landed on a genre that they love. But in middle grade, they're still very much open to anything. We get a lot of requests for fantasy, but that's just generally kids. They love to be immersed in a fantasy world very different than their own, but they're just as happy to pick up historical or contemporary or anything. So we're seeing a very even desire among our readers for all of the genres. And so that's why we're looking for a huge variety of genres in the books that we're publishing.
I have just one quick question.
Yes.
I read a book. It was an adult book and it was very informational, but it was all about the body part industry. And so I had this
I'm sorry,
idea.
I didn't hear you about the what?
Body part.
Yes. That people will sell body parts.
Okay.
For money. It's a huge business, and they'll pay like $800 for a leg. And so I had this idea about this child that goes missing, and it's all to do with this local, it's a very weird place and nobody really knows what they do. Do you think that's too graphic for this kind of age, or do you think that they would understand this is a problem in society? And if I approach it right, and I'm not really deep into it, but I give a vague overview, do you think that they would even be interested in reading something like that? Because the people are, they want to traffic him, but they think they'll make more money cutting him up and selling him for body parts, but his best friend saves him. So it's incorporating quite a few things going on in Fayetteville, North Carolina right now.
Okay.
Is that too much for this age group, or no?
I think my gut is saying, yes, that's too much.
Okay,
But in some ways, it would depend on how you put the story together and what you focused on, how you're, again, if you're focusing in on your main character's internal story,
yes,
and that would be what's happening in the external, you might be able to pull it off.
okay,
I would probably recommend marketing that more in a YA. YA, anything goes. And so I feel like that would definitely fit better and be more attractive in a YA setting. But it could be a younger YA. I mean, your characters could be 15 instead of 12 or 13. And I think it would fit better in that. That's my gut response is, yeah, I would put that into YA. But at the same time, if you think you can form it in a way that it is okay with a younger age category, you could give it a try. But I'm not sure how it would be received.
it's
Again,
just all about.
that's my opinion.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you. I just
You're
want to make
welcome.
them aware.
Yes.
I have a quick question because I am not very familiar at all with middle grade. But
Okay.
what about well, like sweet, innocent sort of romantic elements? Is that too young of an audience for that? Because I know when you get to YA, like you said,
Yes.
nothing sacred. So there's like a huge jump between the two. I just wondered if in middle grade, I never thought about it before, but is there some for those types of romantic elements? Is that something avoided? Is that something addressed?
That one's in a lot of ways up to the publisher. For Chicken Scratch books, we don't include any sort of sexuality at all in any of our books. In fact, we rarely even portray a crush. That's pretty much the extent of what we will portray, because our focus is new traditional middle grade fiction. And so we focus on the traditional values. But other publishers won't shy away from that as much as we do. Again, but it's just kind of incremental. You can have some of that in middle grade. Anything goes in YA. So in that upper middle grade, there is some transition.
The only reason why I was asking is because I know from personal experience with my own children, by the time they hit 8, 9, 10 years old, there already was crushes. There was already, that's real life. And I wondered whether that was ever addressed in middle grade at it, like I said, a really innocent level, nothing sexual or graphic, but just wondered.
Right.
So.
Right. And that's typically what you see in middle grade is more of that innocent romance, innocent crushes. There is starting to be more and more. There is starting to be more and more sexualization in these younger books from some publishers, and that's something we totally shy away from. We don't go there at Chicken Scratch. We keep it very traditional.
That's good to know.
I loved my second grade teacher. So
Oh, I bet she was beautiful.
she was.
Yeah, I loved my third grade teacher. He was so handsome, big old mustache.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Any other comments or questions? Well, Kiri, you've done a wonderful job in going through this level of book, and it's something that we've never had here before. And I want to thank you very much and commend you for the quality of your presentation. And
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I'm
think-
excited I got to present with you.
Yeah, and I think we've all learned something about an area that many of us might consider going into, you know. And
It's a great age category to write for, and it's a very fun, pure storytelling type of writing. So
yeah, I have to think back on what I felt like at that age and maybe get into it that way, you know.
One of my biggest advices that I can give to anybody who's considering writing for middle grade is to read middle grade. Read a whole, and don't read the classic middle grade, read current middle grade, because the voice of middle grade is the key. And you have to have the voice of that 12-year-old, of that 13-year-old. Your character has to think the way a 12-year-old actually thinks. And so it's a very distinct voice, more than any other age category. That middle grade voice is vital. So read, and the only way to really get a feel for that is to read. So read middle grade. And then you can get an idea if it's something you feel like you could dive into.
Are you familiar with Nordhoff and Hall? They wrote a series of books about the sea. You know,
No, I'm not
ships.
familiar with those.
Oh, okay. When I was young, I loved those. And I would look for any book that was by Nordhoff and Hall. And I wondered, like, if any sea stories are still appealing.
Definitely, definitely. Some of the best books that I have that most of them are historical fiction sea stories, but there are some contemporary sea stories as well.
Mhm.
There's one called Voyage of the Frog by Gary Paulson, which he wrote years ago,
Mhm.
but it's fantastic. It's a sea story. Avi's book, The True Confessions of Charlotte Doyle, historical fiction,
Oh, yeah.
absolutely fabulous story. Fabulous story. That's one of my all-time favorites. So it is. There are some out there, but I haven't. Those are both older. I'm trying to think if there's any contemporary in the last 5 or 10 years. I can't think of any. That doesn't mean they're not there, but I love sea stories.
Me too. Okay, anybody else? Okay, then I'll turn it over to Michelle for her concluding remarks.
Hi again. I just want to let everybody know who our next month's speaker is. Her name is Lisa Diane Kastner, and she's the founder and executive editor of Running Wild Press. Honored with 2 Best of 2019 and 2 Best of 2020 books, according to Kirkus Reviews. Her authors have garnered several starred reviews, as well as additional acclaim. In 2021, Lisa was named to Yahoo Finance's top 10 entrepreneurs to watch and LA Wire's top 10 businesses to watch lists, and as well as the New York Weekly's top 10 females to watch. She's also been featured in Forbes, and she was nominated to Forbes' Next 1000, which is a list of American self-funded entrepreneurs who continue to strive during the challenging times of COVID. Lisa resides in Los Angeles, California, with her husband and their 2 felines, the Master and Margarita. So that's our speaker for next month. She'll be speaking on how to build your writing career. And it's a workshop that will walk participants through how to build a strategy and then associated plan to get their writing from concept to publication. Attendees will leave the session with a detailed plan and action items for their career, for their books. That session is normally a 2 to 3 hour workshop that she presents. She speaks all over the country. We're trying to figure out if we can give her a little more time than the usual hour. We'll know more by middle of next month. We're trying to maybe expand the meeting to at least noon to give her a little bit more time to accomplish that. I think it'd be more beneficial, but we're still trying to figure that out. Either way, please be here next week. It should be fabulous. I've heard Lisa speak multiple times and she really knows her stuff. Also, her company acquired 25 titles this year. So her authors are off and running.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Michelle. And it's been a pleasure being with all of you, and our guest speaker, Kiri, thank you again. And we'll see you in July. Over and out.
Thanks, everyone.